Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our first episode of Journeys of Faith. I'm Ahmed Al Kuchuk Mullah, the chair of the Islamic Society. I'm here with the Dr. Imam Muhammad Gamal Abdul Noor and Zain Al Azm, my co host. Thank you all for being here. Today is our live launch, and we're excited to be here today with you.
Okay, to give you an idea of what to expect in today's episode, here's how we've structured the conversation. First, we'll start with a brief introducing Dr. Gamal himself. He'll be introducing himself, where he'll share some insights about his life, his academic journey, and role as an imam and academic scholar. We hope this structure helps guide the conversation and provide you with valuable takeaways. So, without further delay, let's begin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gamal. We're really honored to have you here. We would like to start to talk about your life. And first, like, share a bit about your background and how your journey started here as an imam, as an academic as well. Uh, do you have any thoughts on our podcast? First question.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. First of all, thank you so much for having me for this podcast. Thankful for Bath University Islamic Society as a whole, the amazing work you've been doing on this platform. And I hope, inshallah, this podcast and this series will be of some use um, um, to the university students, Muslim university students, as well as non-Muslims. And even the wider community. When I came to really think of what to share about my journey in terms of education and my life in general in the UK, and my upbringing and that, I thought a good starting point, obviously, is to start from my own childhood. I was born and raised in Egypt, in a city called Al-Giza, which is literally the third largest city in Egypt after Cairo and Alexandria. There I received my primary, junior, and high school education. I'll come back to that in a minute, as this is going to be, inshallah, the focus of this tonight's session. After that, I graduated from Al Azhar University roughly 14 years ago with a bachelor's in Islamic studies and philosophy, followed by a master's um, um, in comparative religion, more particularly at the Catholic tradition at the University of Durham. And then after that, I did a PhD in the University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies. And it was during my PhD time that I moved to the city of Bath to work as the Imam of Bath Islamic Society in tandem with my academic career. Inshallah, I'll be able to share more on that as we advance in our episode. Yeah.
That is quite a vivid life you've lived. I want to ask you, Imam, in terms of the concept of Islamic education throughout your childhood, what would you say the highlights is in that period of time was?
That's a really good question to start with, Zaina. Um, to give a bit of a background that really sets the scene for what the concept of Islamic education meant for me in that period of my life, the childhood period. In Egypt, uh, as the case with many Muslim countries, probably, there are three tracks for education. There is the public education, where people would have a national curriculum, mostly more or less like the Western education system. You get to study STEM subjects as well as humanities subjects, literally according to the system, to the Western system of education. And this is literally the most dominant scheme in the Egyptian education. The second track is the private track, where you do the same studies, but the language of instruction would primarily be English. And you study also, as a second language, you study German or you study French. But there is the third track of education, which at some point in the past, I'm not talking about the distant past, probably like 100 years ago, it was the most dominant scheme of education, not just in Egypt, but literally in many other parts of the Muslim world. That is the Azhari education. The Azhari education goes back to, takes its name from Al-Azhar Mosque, and which identifies today as the Al-Azhar University, the oldest degree granting university in the Muslim world. So I received my primary education in Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar, as of today, roughly has up to 2 million students across Egypt. And it has, if I remember correctly, 5,000 institutes across Egypt. So when you go to the university lies in Cairo and has other branches, but the key campus is in Cairo, right next to Al-Azhar Mosque. Apart from that, there are institutes across the country. So at a very early age, at the age of literally when I was 5, I joined Al-Azhar Institute in my own district. And what really distinguishes the Al-Azhar education from the private as well as the public sector of education is simply the focus it places on the Quran as well as Islamic studies in general. So on top of doing STEM subjects, you also do geography, history, Islamic studies heavily. Thinking of studies like Nahw and Sarf, Arabic grammar, Arabic rhetorics, and many other Arabic studies and Islamic studies. So it's very heavy on that. From the age of 5 up to the age of 11, I did the primary education, so 6 years of primary education. At the age of 11, you are expected to have finished the entire Quran. Yeah.
Just before that, I wanted to ask a question for our audience as well, and for me and Zaina. Is Al-Azhar was a school as well for you? So from your primary school was an Azhari school,
Yep.
We could say.
Yep.
And before we go to the next chapter,
Yep,
that you
sure.
needed to finish the Quran, can you tell us what was the difference between an Azhari school in Egypt and another different school? What was the difference between your school and other schools? You would say, and it was foundation for you.
Absolutely. The primary thing that distinguishes Al-Azhar from other schools is literally the emphasis it places on Islamic studies. So when the public education and the private education would have, say, 5 or 6 subjects, they study maths, science. At Al-Azhar, you would have up to 15 subjects. And at the center of it, you would have the Quran. At the age of 11, you are expected to really have built the foundations at the most basic level. And what I mean by the foundations here, primarily the Quran. I have to say, at the by that age, even though you are expected to have memorized the Quran at the age of 11, not every single Azhari student would end up doing that. In my own cohort, I was the only one who memorized the Quran by that age. And after the primary education, you move to the junior education for up to 3 years, and then the high school education for another 3 years, where you get to choose whether you do STEM subjects or humanities subjects, and then the university for 4 other years. And that leads me to Zaina's question to do with the highlight of that period in my life. Um, um, I'd say the highlight of that period was primarily the memorization of the Quran. Um, um, I was born to a family that um, normal middle class family that um, 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 emphasized religious studies, more particularly the Quran. So they did always push me towards Quran memorization and this and that. So I think it was at the age of 7 that I started the process of learning. Um, and the reason I consider this to be the highlight of that period is it literally cultivated the key skills that shaped my character after that. The key virtues, the key skills, the key values. And I'm, on top of the values and virtues that it cultivated, I'm emphasizing this also because in this part of the world, memorization and rote learning are not often seen in a positive light. People would always place memorization in opposition to understanding. Through that, like dichotomized understanding. Either you understand or you memorize. I think my journey was quite different. And at essence, one cannot separate memorization from understanding, in the sense that up to this very moment, still memorization plays a massive part in our own cognitive system. As in, you can't do, for example, the multiplication tables without memorization. You can't do the periodic table without memorization. So still a significant part of it. The problem lies in that sort of the either or pattern of thinking. Either you do this or you do that. Memorizing the Quran was a game changer in my life, in the sense that it cultivated so many virtues. To begin with, to name one virtue, I'd say it's the practical skills that remained with me for the life to come. And what I mean by this, what does it take for one to memorize the Quran? I'm talking about, like, it's a 30. The Quran has 30 juz, um, 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 no less than 600 pages in the most commonly used copy today. It's not an easy thing. So what it takes like some sort of sustained concentration. It takes a structured routine that you follow. It was not an easy thing. So the first thing I want to emphasize here is literally the skills like time management, goal setting. Like, this journey took no less than 3 years to end up with the last juz of the Quran. So in the middle, it teaches patience, perseverance, and these values that were with me for the life to come.
So you're talking about the virtues that kind of played into maybe skills as well that you may have learned. What would you say the core skills that you learned from the Quran were in that childhood period?
That's another very important question. The ones that I mentioned to do with the practical life, as in the skills that were there for the life to come, patience, perseverance, and time management, goal setting. On top of that, I'd say philosophically speaking, I said in an earlier introduction that philosophy was one of my majors. Somehow the Quran prepared me for that. When you come into the Quran as a child, your mind is literally showered with so many concepts that you would never ever think of if you haven't approached a book like the Quran. Imagine a kid being exposed to ideas like, I don't know, the hereafter, angels, God, physics, metaphysics, politics, economics. All those areas open up the mind in an unbelievable way. Um, um, that openness comes with skills. What I mean by this, by what I refer to those, I'm referring to the analytical and critical skills. And by this, I mean literally, think when the Quran introduces a certain encounter between, say, the believers or the non-believers, the Quran does not just say, believe in this or believe in that. It literally narrates a story, and it tells you this is how the conversation went. Um, um, and, and in doing that, the Quran analyzes the arguments that are being made. Not just doesn't just analyze, it actually refutes and critiques. Um, um, as a constant and a committed reader of the Quran, one develops analytical and critical skills subconsciously, and you only realize that when you grow up. So it becomes more of a second nature to you. So the key philosophical skills that one develops by maintaining that relationship with the Quran, whether through analysis or criticality, were foundational as skills that I've gained from that commitment with the Quran. But to be honest, not only that, even linguistically, the language of the Quran, we all know, the beauty of it and the way the Quran presents its own arguments and this and that. Um, it does impact one's understanding of language, of grammar, of vocab, not only of Arabic but also of other languages. So it did make my acquisition of other languages much more easier. Um, uh, After when I was an undergrad, I became to study English. I studied German. I studied French, and something that always um, um, fascinated my teachers was the very quick nature of uh, you know uh, acquisition of a foreign language. And they asked me, many times, like, was that obvious that you get your teachers to ask you what is happening here? Um, um, and when I reflect upon this, it's nothing but what the Quran does to your mind. Again, think of a book that is very classical, the language it uses, the structures it uses, uh, 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 um, the vocab, the grammar, how the formation of the language itself. It did impact not just, again, my understanding of Arabic, but also acquisition of other languages, which again deepens the way you may communicate with other people. So you may think of communication skills apart from the intellectual virtues that I mentioned earlier. Um, um, so I mentioned practical values or practical virtues. Think of patience, perseverance, time management, goal setting. I also mentioned philosophical ideas. The concept the Quran uses is just unbelievable. I'm pretty sure things will come up to my mind
Yeah,
as we talk. Yeah.
that's really amazing, especially like touching upon the, I would say, the philosophical. We didn't want to go to it now, just so we focus on the childhood for now. I would say, like, how do you think, like, in your childhood? Because I'm sure in that age you wouldn't understand the Quran fully. As you said, memorization was the biggest part of that time for you. How did it help you in this time with your other studies that you have? Memorizing the Quran, but at the same time you're younger, you don't understand the Quran, but you also had many other things going on in your life, other subjects that you were studying. So how did it help you? Like, how did the Quran help you in this journey? I would say in your childhood, what effect did it have on you on that period of life?
To do with to do with time management, it was a challenge, but it was not as challenging as it is today for many people. As in, for those who grew up in that period, and without naming the exact year, um, um, we did not have anything that would take us away, that distract us. Today there are a lot of distractions that really take people away and take kids away from their focus, from their studies. Back then, uh, um, um, this bring a lot of memories now. I think kids used to enjoy the life more than kids would do today. As in, the life was full of real life experiences. You did not have devices to play with. That means you will go out and play with other kids' actual games. Um, and that developed communication skills with other kids, and it was unbelievably rich from that perspective. Then the question that comes up out of this, how did I manage in terms of time? I'd say the absence of the distractions that we have today left much time for you. So the day would start literally from Fajr time. You pray Fajr, um, uh, have a couple of hours before the school starts. Go to school at 9 o'clock, come back at 2. In have your lunch, and then the Quran class would start 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. I was born in a generation where they had something called Kuttab. I'm not entirely sure if it, still I'm pretty sure it exists in some part of the Muslim world, but back then it was very dominant. The Kuttab, it's literally, in Arabic, it's the plural of Katib. Katib is basically the writer. So you go to the Kuttab to learn how to read and how to write and that. So I used to be part of that tradition. So actually 6 days a week, I come back from the institute where I had, various studies, science and maths and Arabic and all of it. But then after I come back home, 4 o'clock, I would go to that Kuttab, spend, up to 2 hours, come back home. Because the day was structured in that way, you didn't have to worry much about time management. This is the track you're following. And one thing I have to add, it wasn't, the stepping stone, the teething phase was literally in the first juz of the Quran, where I do remember when I was in that Kutab, we had literally 60 kids. Out of those 60, we only had 3 people who literally finished that program. And the reason I emphasized the first part of the Quran, or the first juz of the Quran, when I finished that juz, I really felt there was something big. As a kid, I was not, that, at least that's how I thought of myself back then. I think it was a real thing. Like, I was not that bright. I was not that. I mean, so for me to finish one entire juz, that was a really big thing. My teacher back then, he left Egypt and went to a different country to work there. That means the Kutab now is free. That doesn't have a teacher. Literally every single one of those guys who were with me, they left the program. They did not continue. I was probably the only one who moved elsewhere to continue that program, primarily because it felt so big for me that I finished one entire juz of the Quran. And it was a very spiritually rewarding experience, in that I could feel that something is changing in me, that a connection is being developed with the Quran. From that moment, the Quran started to move from being more of a duty or a task that you're doing it because the family is insisting, to being something that you really enjoy. Just starting the second juz of the Quran. But one day I went to the Kutab on Eid day, when you're supposed to have like 3 days off. Um, as a kid, I was literally 8 that year. Uh, um, I stood in front of that kutab for up to 20 minutes. Uh, and my teacher happened to be passing by. What are you doing here? I said, I mean, waiting for you. I said, no, there's no class for today, not tomorrow, not the day after. But he hugged me and he kissed my forehead to say, one day your relationship with the Quran will be more than what you could imagine. And that 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 memory stayed with me, as a kid. I don't know what was happening, what was pushing me, but I could see that there is some sort of love and passion that developed subconsciously in that relationship with the Quran. Yeah.
MashaAllah. That's quite a nice thing to see in retrospect to who you are now, and then have that story almost mirror into your adult life. I want to come back to something you said, which is how obviously there are a lot more distractions nowadays that didn't exist back in your childhood, um, and maybe ask you for a piece of advice as to how to tackle this change of, you know, the youth in this modern age have a lot more distractions, and how they might be able to balance, for example, even memorization of the Quran, or just, you know, their general daily uh, obligations, with these distractions around them.
That's another very important question indeed. Um, I'd say, you know, uh, uh, given my time here in Bath Mosque, I could, mashallah, I see a lot of interested uh, youngsters in Quran memorization. And many of them would often come to me and say, I wish I did this much earlier. It's becoming very challenging. Distractions are a lot more than what they used to be when I was a kid. How did you do that? Um, um, and something that always comes to my mind when I think, uh, not just, to be honest, not just with the Quran, what it takes, um, given the distractions and the limitations of time that we have today, for you to start something, you need commitment, a sense of commitment. And that's when I think, when I reflect on that period, I find that sense of commitment, uh, you know, you have the resolution, you have the willingness to start something, is an essential factor in the as you come to introduce a new habit in your life, especially in this age, if you want to start that program of Quran memorization. Plus consistency, um, um, as in you become consistent. What people, um, you know, we have those periods in our lives when you feel that you're very excited about something, you want to do it now, and you finish of it as much as you can, but then, you know, it calms down and you lose that sort of impulse or interest. Um, Consistency challenges that. When people focus on intensity, consistency says no. You have to really, you know, compartmentalize stuff, instead of, you know, think of uh, what people do when it comes to going to the gym today. Um, Probably the most successful athletes, or probably the only successful athletes, are the ones who are consistent, who take that as more of a lifestyle rather than being, you know, a one-off thing. Uh, um, um, the vast majority of people wouldn't succeed at long-term plans, mainly because they only work with that concept of intensity in mind, and then as in they do a lot of hard work in one go, but they don't develop that sort of consistent habit of doing something, whether they are motivated or not. That's another thing to do with Quran memorization. I had those two concepts back then inculcated in the way things develop: sense of commitment, um, and a sense of consistency. Uh, um, I have to be really honest. How did it all start? Um, even though I emphasized, the family was there and this and that, something was also beyond that. That's the divine aid. Allah helps. Allah, when Allah, throws a certain passion in you, and that things happen in unbelievable ways. Allah's aid before anything was there, plus those two concepts: commitment, a sense of commitment, and a sense of consistency. And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us this as well, when he said, أفضل العمل أدومه وإن قل, the best of deed is the one that you do consistently, even if it's so little. So when it comes to this, to indulging or delving into a Quran memorization program, don't go with intensity, but rather go with consistency.
Yes. A question that would come to our minds here in our age, students or any individual, is often we get excited about things, and that's why we overdo things, and we're not consistent on it. What do you think can be a sustainable motivation behind this? A motivation to start. What would you say is behind that? So you don't get really excited at the moment, but you have a consistent motivation behind memorizing the Quran, or balancing between the consistency and commitment.
That's a wonderful question. Yeah. Always raising the question of why keeps people motivated. The vast majority of people are often busy with the question of how. How am I going to memorize the Quran? And that question is very off-putting. First of all, it's a hefty task, long-term thing, and we as humans, we hate long-term stuff. Everyone, likes short-term stuff, immediate gains and this and that. So when you ask the question of how do I memorize, it becomes so difficult, especially when you are right at the beginning. It is not easy. But beginning with the question of why always, keeps the mind motivated, keeps the heart enlightened by what you're doing, in the sense that ask the question of why am I memorizing the Quran? Whose book is that? Why does it matter to me? Who is speaking here? That is Allah, the one who created us, the one who placed us here. And when I memorize those words, when I memorize that book, I become in a constant relationship with Him. So the more you deepen your answer to the question of why, the more you develop a natural commitment and relationship with the Quran itself. And the power of the question of why, simply because it opens our eyes to the goals and the objectives, while the question of how opens your mind to the means rather than the goals. And when you think of the means, again, you start to think of the difficulty of the process, and that's a long-term thing. It's very time-consuming and this and that. So I'd say always keep the question of why in mind, and also actually something that I do with my own daughter at the moment, who is now, alhamdulillah, she's memorized up to 8 juz's of the Quran, and she's 8 as well. There is this, I said it's a long-term process, it's a long-term plan, but it's on the way. You want to make sure that I have some sort of some immediate gains, as in immediate wins. Every time she finishes a juz of the Quran, she gets to a little party, a little celebration that shows her that you've achieved something, and we are celebrating this. And guess what? It's as early as she was 7, she got exposed to the idea of why. I mean, her mom and I, we always raise that question with her, by way of highlighting that you're not doing this for us, And even if we are emphasizing this, we are only emphasizing this because we can see that this will be of great benefit to you. But if you are doing this for us, you don't have to do it. That is something we always emphasize, because again, it raises the question of why in the mind of a child. And we often underestimate the mental capacities of kids. Um, um, uh, Even though we often say that the kids ask the most intelligent questions. If someone can ask an intelligent question, that can equally mean they can process the most difficult answer, as long as you try to simplify what you say. So it becomes our own problem, as in how to simplify what you wanna say.
So by almost a kind of that delayed gratification that you're talking about with, for example, you finish yours and you have some sort of celebratory event for it. Does that kind of almost build discipline through a young age, and then that would be something that would build on to the person as an adult? But if, for example, if they haven't had that, as a child, and coming into it from a more kind of mature age, understanding why memorizing the Quran is important, I think, is something that is quite misunderstood in society. And sometimes you see people where, I'm happy where I am right now. I'm praying my prayers, I fast, I give zakah. Why should I memorize the Quran? I read the Quran every day. And that question of why, almost, there's no clear answer
Mhm.
seen. What would you say?
That's a very, very, very important question. Um, First of all, the reason I highlighted the memorization of the Quran as the highlight of my childhood is mainly because of that. Um, um, to be even more honest, I would consider the Quran, memorizing the Quran, as the highlight of my life, not just the highlight of my childhood. Um, um, what do I gain out of it? What did I gain out of it? Yes, as you say, as a Muslim, you may say, uh, I do the daily prayers, I do this, I do that. That's a, why would I really be interested in doing that when it looks really to be hard work? Um, which is, as you indicated, Zaina, it's not when something comes from experience, that I experienced that joy, so it's not easy for me to transfer that to someone. It's one of those experiential types of knowledge. Um, um, to me, from my own experience, I talked about the feeling that I got when I, um, uh, finished the first juz. That sort of spiritual reward that you get, or the sense of, you feel that sense of gratification because you finished or accomplished a juz of the Quran or something. Um, 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 that's a good starting point, as in, why should I memorize the Quran? The depth of your relationship with Allah that comes with it is beyond explanation. It's for a good reason. In the Islamic tradition, those who memorize the Quran are identified as Ahlullah, the people of Allah, in the sense that the time is spent on the Quran. The concept of awliyaullah, becoming a friend of Allah or a fellow of Allah, so to speak, these concepts are intimately linked to having a deep relationship with Allah. That depth, I don't know, if one does not have a deep relationship with the Quran, how would one get it? I mean, what are the sources? Even and to be really blunt here, I often wonder, Muslims who haven't memorized the Quran, how do they enjoy the prayer? How do they enjoy, stand, think of Taraweeh, think of Tahajjud, think of those long prayers? Especially, it becomes even double for those who don't speak Arabic. Don't think it's because of the imams or the voice is nice or something. Um, um, so imagine someone, the quality of your Islam becomes completely different once you have that developed relationship with the Quran. If this is the only thing that one benefits from memorizing the Quran, and then it's more than enough. But um, I'm not talking just about memorization. The Quran often emphasizes the idea of tadabbur and tafakkur, and that is particularly intriguing, as in that takes me back to where I started from. Like memorization in the Islamic tradition was not seen in opposition to comprehension and understanding and this and that. The double benefit of this is that you literally get to gain an immediate gratification when you read the Quran, when you engage with its ideas. So the depth of your relationship to Islam goes in numerous ways that you wouldn't have imagined without the Quran. So if someone is asking me, why should I memorize the Quran? I'd say if having a quality Islam matters to you, this is the way to go.
Thank you very much for the insightful. We want to take the final words, and the last thing we want to ask you is, looking back to yourself as a young, you talked about your childhood, and at this part you talked about your childhood and memorization. This was, I would say, the highlight of this first episode. What advice would you give to people that would like to be consistent, committed, and balancing their life and memorizing the Quran and the concept of balance?
I'd say first of all, you know, I'm almost fully convinced that every Muslim knows that the Quran is so important, and every Muslim takes this as a given fact, that it's a very special thing. But when it comes to how to put this into practice, how do I develop this relationship? How do I start a memorization program? Why does it matter to my mind? Why does it matter to my heart? And this and that. They often would say, I wait until I finish my degree. I wait until, I have a family and I'm settled. I wait until, I'll wait for the ideal moment. That ideal moment will never come. Think of your own entire past. No one can locate like an ideal moment. Like you will always lack something. So so if I have a piece of advice to anyone who is really thinking and passionate about Quran memorization, I'd say, just in Arabic we say irmi nafsak, yani throw yourself. Start, no matter what. Don't wait for the ideal moment. It never comes. It will never come. And when you start, don't go with intensity, but rather go with consistency and compartmentalization. Compartmentalize really helps the process, and an added value to people who are not kids anymore. That you have a lot of distractions, you have a lot of things to accomplish in your life, and this and that. They also have a good mental capacity. I mean, with a kid, at times it's quite difficult to really understand the value of things. You see, as a kid, kids, most of the time, they don't see the value of the Quran. It's the opposite thing with the youth. They see the value, but they don't have the dedication, and they don't have the time, sorry. When it's the opposite with kids, they have the time, but they don't have they can't understand the value of it until you explain and until you take it very seriously. So so the added value with UH is literally, when you understand the value of something, you are more likely to make plans for it. So I hope, raising the question of why and raising the question of the quality Islam, so to speak, will help make us really take this as seriously as we can. And And trust me, it's the fruits of it is just beyond me. Up to this very moment, Alhamdulillah, I published 3 books. Those 3 books, let alone my entire graduate and postgraduate education, were primarily motivated by the Quran, intellectually, philosophically, analytically, critically, and inshallah, maybe we can discuss. Sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Imam. Thank you for being here. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the first episode of Journeys of Faith. We really hope that today's conversation has sparked some valuable reflections and provided you with practical advice for your own journey. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at BathISOC, and feel free to send us your questions or topics that you'd like us to discuss in future episodes, inshallah.
Until next time, take care, keep striving with purpose, and remember, our faith is the foundation of all that we do. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. أحسنت يا أحمد. لا والله ما شاء الله عليكم. Did a wonderful job.